Hi everyone, in this video, let us try to understand the another format of printing the output, and also let us try to understand the attributes that print statement allows us to use. Attributes are the features that print statement allows us to use. Keeping that aside, let us try to observe this line number 11. Here in this line number 11, we can see that we have initialized a variable A with the value 3, which is the integer value, variable B with a value string, which is the string value because it is enclosed between single quotations, and variable C is a floating point value, that is 3344.656. Now let us understand the print statement that is present here. When you try to see this print statement, we can see that the entire content to be printed is enclosed in the strings. So before understanding what is this string part actually means, let us try to understand this percentile and these parameters that are passed after the percentile in the brackets. So when you try to remember the dot format method, in the dot format method, we try to pass the input variables A, B, C, and so on to the dot format method, so that the dot format method tries to replace those input variables in the corresponding brackets as we see in the dot format method earlier. In the same way, this percentile is used to replace this first percentile with the A value, second percentile with the C value, and the third percentile with the B value. So in this way, this percentile symbol works like same as dot format method. Now let us try to understand what does this string part actually means. So when you try to observe the string part, there are three kind of symbols present there. That is percentile, .2f, percentile d, and percentile s. Here, the people who came from the C language background will easily identify these symbols. But let me try to explain what does these symbols actually means. Here, this percentile s is used to print a string value. This percentile d is used to print an integer value. And this percentile .2f, which can be simply written as percentile f, which is used to print the floating point value. Then there is a question, what does this .2f actually means? When you try to observe this content, this is similar to the content that we have discussed in the previous video, that is 0:.2f, which is used to round. This .2f indicates round the decimal value to 2 digits. In the same way, this percentile .2f is used to round the decimal value to 2 digits. Now let us try to understand the output, corresponding output obtained, and understand these things in detail. So when you try to observe the output, or the first output that we got because of this percentile .2f is replaced by the variable a, that is 3. But the variable a contains the value 3, which is an integer, but we are getting the output 3.00, which is a floating point value. Why? Because here the first value, the percentile symbol states that it only prints the floating point value. So any integer values given to this will be converted into floating point value, and then this .2f indicates that round the decimal part to 2 digits, but there is no content in its decimal part because 3 is an integer, right? A is equal to 3 is an integer which does not have any decimal part. So that's the reason it has to round it to 2 digits, because so that's the reason. So when it tries to round it to 2 digits, there are no values, so that's the reason it places 2 zeros in the decimal part. So that's the reason we got 3.00 here. And now let us try to see this percentile d. Here this percentile d is used to print the integer value. But what we are passing to it, that is c, we are passing c to it. But what does c contains? A floating point value, that is 3344.656, which is a floating point value. But this percentile d expects an integer value. So whatever floating point value you pass to this percentile d, what does this percentile d actually do? It only considers the integer part. It only considers the integer part and skips the point value. That is, when you try to pass 3344.656 to this percentile d, it only outputs 3344. So that is given here. And now let us try to understand the string part. So when you try to observe this percentile s, it expects or it wants to print the string. When you try to observe this percentile s, it wants to print the string. So the value that is passed to it is b. So when you see b contains a word string, so that's the reason that is printed as it is. There is no issue for it. So that's the reason we got the same output as string. So this is how this percentile format method works. But let me show you the default way of printing the statement. Just let us try to swap these two values and let us try to see what will be the output. And now let us try to see the output here. So I just have swapped those two values and then I have replaced the values, and let us see what is the output. So now the C value will be going to the percentile .2f. The C contains 3344.656. When I try to round it to 2 digits, what would be the output? So it is almost crossing 56, right? So when you try to round this value to 2 digits, we will get the output as 3344.66. So that's the reason, since it's a floating point value, there is no issue. We are getting the output as it is, but we are rounding it to 2 digits. So that's the reason we are getting 66 here. When you try to observe, we are giving a value to percentile d, which means this percentile d expects integer, and we gave it an integer so that the integer is printed as it is without any floating point value. So here in the previous case we got 3.00 because we have passed this a to the percentile f, but in this case we have passed the value a to percentile d, which expects an integer, and we gave it an integer, so that's the reason we are getting the 3 as output. And this b is kept as it is, and b is a string, and it is given to percentile s. The string is printed as it is. So this is how the output works. Here I would like to create a small error so that you could understand a concept here. Let me try to create an error here first. Here when you try to observe the content, I just have swapped the BA values. I just have swapped these two values, and then I got an error. Why does I got an error? Because when you try to observe, this B contains a string. When you try to observe that this B value is now going to percentile D, which can only print the integer value, but we are giving a string to the percentile D. So that's the reason we are getting an error. Percentile D formats, a number is required, not string. Str means string. So here B is a string, and you are trying to give to the percentile D, which is used to print the integer value. So that's the reason it tries as an error. So I tried to produce this error to make you understand that the corresponding percentile symbols are used to produce the corresponding outputs only. So then there are also questions. In the previous case, we have converted the float to int into float because these two are numbers. So that's the reason there is a possibility of conversion between the percentile d and percentile f. But we cannot convert an integer value to string or float value to string. So that's the reason we got this error. Now let us try to understand the attributes that print statement offers us. So when you try to see this for loop, this is default for loop, right? Here for I in range of 10, I am printing the value of I, which means the I value is iterated from 0 to n minus 1, that is 0 to 9. So initially the I value is 0. So 0 got printed because I'm printing the I. In the next iteration, the I value is 1. In the next iteration, the I value is 2. In the same way, for the last iteration, the I value is 9. So here we can see that for every iteration, we are going to a new line. Python virtual machine, internally, this Python virtual machine is trying to print the every iteration content in the new line. So what if we don't want to print the values in the new line like this? So what if we want spaces here instead of the slash n's? So here Python virtual machine trying to produce every output, trying to produce not every output, trying to produce output of every iteration in the new line. But if I want the output to print like this with spaces, then what should I do? So there is a special feature that print statement offers us. Let us try to see the special feature or the attribute that print statement offers us here. So here when you try to observe this line, this is what the desired output that I want. So as I said, 0 space, 1 space, 2 space. So this is what the desired output as I have said previously. So how did I got this output? So how did I got this output from 0 to 9? So we got this output because we have used some special attribute or special feature called end is equal to space, which is used to produce space at the end of every iteration instead of new line. Previously, for every iteration, the output is passed to the new line. But due to this end is equal to space character, it tries to print the output with spaces. So what if I want at the rate for every output here? So then I will just pass at the rate here so that the system will end every iteration with an at the rate instead of a slash n or space like this case. Now let us try to place at the rate here and try to see the output. Here when you try to see the output, this is what we decide, right? So initially 0 got printed, and then end, it end indicates end with at the rate. So it is ended with at the rate, and then the I value is incremented by 1, and then 1 got printed, and then this end indicates end with at the rate. In the same way, the I value is 9, it got printed, and this end indicates end with at the rate. The main point that everyone needs to understand is that this end is used only in the loops. So in the normal print statements, we cannot use this end attribute. Keep that in mind. It is very, very important. We can only use the end attribute in the loops. And then there is another feature that Python print statement allows us to use. Here let us try to see the line number 2. Here I initialized the a value to 2 and b variable to 3 and c variable to a string cat. So when I am trying to print, right, by default, we are getting the values separated by space. You can see that 2 space, 3 space, cat. 3 values got printed separated by space by default. What if I don't want space here? I just want to change it to some value. So here I try to use the attribute called separator, which means separator is equal to dot, which means the space now should be replaced by dot because I'm trying to separate them with dot. So we can see that the output is separated by dot, 2 dot, 3 dot, cat. So in this way, we can replace this separator by any symbol. If you try to replace this with at the rate, you will get 2 at the rate, 3 at the rate, cat. Let me try to change this output and so that you can see it. Here, when I change this value to at the rate, we can see that they are separated by at the rate here, 2 at the rate, 3 at the rate, cat. So this is how we can also use this separated attribute. By default, the Python virtual machine tries to keep the separator as space. There is one thing that we need to notice is that the separator can only be used when you are trying to print multiple values. Here we are trying to print multiple values, so that's the reason we are separating the multiple values by at the rate. By default, if you are trying to print a single variable like print a, so if you are trying to write this statement print a, which contains a single value to get printed, here we cannot use separator because there is nothing to separate. You will get an error. So that's the reason the separator is only used when you having the separator is only used when you are having multiple variables to print at a time. So that is another feature that Python print statement offers us. So this is all about output in Python.